smiths shouldn't be being used for war. The manufacturing of weapons is out of hand. One of the things this World Peace Way was talking about is the need to invest in peace and mediation, not just in weapons. Okay, that's that deity. So let's move on and look at the next one, which is Ra, the king of fire. Ra, with his 3 pyramids, is another fire deity, which is interesting. I suppose the solstice is a time of fire, light, and Ra was very important in ancient Egypt. And in my study of language and what I call the Kabbalah runes, I believe that the sounds carry an energy which then goes into the words. And I think the word Ra is the Kabbalah rune Ra, which comes up in many important words, not least the word red, or rouge in French. And it's also the sound a car makes when it's going, when it's revving up. There's an energy in R that is a bit like the sun. If you study the physics of the sun, the amount of light coming out of the sun, created by these photons streaming towards us, is just mind-boggling. We all depend on that fundamental of the universe. It's inside us, each of us, through the energy which we absorb from food, from solar radiation that's created photosynthesis, which gives us life. Now, it's also then the word reason, ratio, and this all comes from the root in Indo-European, ar, which meant to join. Interestingly, because the radius is what joins the centre and the circumference of the circle, and reason is what connects up different ideas into a pattern of geometrical proportions. It's also there in the root reg, which meant to stretch, straighten, right, to lead, or direct, or rule, and it comes in words like rector, rectus, rule, regimen, and so on. And in Greek, orthos, which meant straight. And orthodox meant going straight to the truth. I was once asked by a friend, are you orthodox? And I say, yes, of course, because I try and go straight to the truth. And it was Aristotle that first used the term orthodox, long before Christians started using the term. I regard the Russian Orthodox Church as totally way off target at the moment, not being orthodox at all. And it's arithmos, it's there in the word for number. I'm with Pythagoras, he said everything comes from number, the arche, which is the source of everything, again the R word. The arche is the essence of everything, is arithmos, number, which is about proportion and relativity. Everything is interdependent, as the Buddhists explain. Every thought we have, every feeling, every idea, it's all interconnected. What is doing the interconnectedness? Well, it could be, given many names, but many of those have R names. And Ra was the Egyptian word for that, which is interconnecting it all, and who is the light itself. So there's lots of, I had fun compiling this, tarot entry on Ra. It's also there in the word archetype, which Jung said is like the name for the partial deities, but they all interconnect. So yes, it's there in the word spirit in Hebrew and Arabic. Ruach, ruh, is the word for spirit, which is the Holy Spirit. Ruach HaKodesh is their word for the divine, and Christians say it's part of the nature of God, the innermost nature. And if you think about is a rushing sound like a river, and it's energy flowing onwards. There was a wonderful thing I discovered once when I was teaching at the University of London about Thomas Aquinas, when he was given his doctorate at the University of Paris. He gave a sermon in Latin, which has come down. We've got a copy of it. We know what he said. He said that a teacher is like someone on a mountain that receives the divine waters from heaven because they're close, they're high up on the mountain, right? Like that Russian woman planting her peace flags. And their duty is then to spread that water down into the plains where there's no water. People are, dying of heat. I mean, tragically in the Hajj, recently in Arabia, there's been 1,000 people have died of heat, standing there, waiting for God's mercy, and they get this sun coming down and they die. And in India, people have died because of this terrible heat. So that's why we need to get the water down to these places. And that's what Aquinas said the duty of the scholar is, the duty of the philosopher, is to send it on down. And Rabbi Hanina said, "Why are the words of the Torah likened unto water? As it is written, Lo, everyone who thirsts, come ye to the waters." It is in order to indicate that just as the water leaves high places and goes to low places, so the words of the Torah leave him who is haughty and stay with him who is humble. So I've explained this in the text, because although Ra is light, fire, actually water is part of that. It's an alchemical transformation. Fire becomes water, and water eventually becomes fire. This is the mystery of alchemy that the Egyptians knew. And the word rune itself is another R word. The rune is a secret, and it's an Old Norse thing, that these things I'm talking about, the Kabbalah runes, they are the building blocks of reality. Another R word there. And yes, and the job of philosophy is to teach ariti, which is virtue. Only if we study virtue, ariti, will we save this planet. And that's why Aristotle emphasised virtue ethics, which has come back. There's a big movement among philosophers now to focus on virtue ethics. I'd love to have that conversation with some of the world's leaders at the moment, Netanyahu and the Hamas people. What is it about your actions that you think are most virtuous at the moment? I'd love to ask them. I think we should all ask that. And somebody even wrote a book on the Egyptian sun god Ra in the Pentateuch, in the Hebrew Bible. He appears. A chap called Gary A. Rensburg has studied all this. So anyway, those are fascinating. Those two, I think they're heavyweights, those two deities. And let's pray that their light can shine on the world as the crisis that we're going through. Ra had a wife called Hathor, who was a goddess associated with agricultural fertility. So, he's very happy, and he's taking his fire up to the pyramids, which were pyramids shaped to represent fire. That's why they were pyramids. Right, okay, that was fun. Any questions about that? Any comments or observations you'd like to make? And then we'll move on. Okay, well there we are. That's exciting. Now let's move on and do the periodic table. So this is a chance to either choose one you're interested in and want to know more about, or just do it blind by putting your finger with your eyes shut. And we'll have a look at what comes up. Okay. So you go first, madam, because you're a guest here. Yeah.
And just pick one.
Yeah, just pick one. Either one that you don't know much about or you haven't heard of before.
I have no idea how to pronounce
What number is it?
108.
108. Okay. Fantastic. Right. That's the Sant Mat tradition, or the Radha Swami tradition, as it's called. And it's classified as a new religious movement. Okay. What are you going to choose, Armel?
Well, besides eclectic goddesses worship,
Oh, okay. You want to have that one? Okay. Good. Well, there we are. They're both neighbours to each other. So, well, we'll do the Radhaswami one first. This comes from northern India, and it's sort of an offshoot of Sikhism. The Sikh tradition, which you must know about, was a fusion of Hindu and Islamic thinking that came up in the late 1500s, early 1500s, with Guru Nanak, who kind of protested, and he didn't want to be either a Sikh or a Hindu. But like we were talking about voting, he didn't want that simplistic choice. He said, I'm both, and I'm neither. And he had this mystical experience. He disappeared into a river and came up 3 days later, downstream. And his first words when he came out was, I am neither Hindu nor Muslim. So that began the Sikh tradition. There were 10 gurus, famous, amazing people. The last one was Guru Gobind Singh. Those are listed under the 111 and 112. So there's all the details there. But they have this holy book, the Guru Granth Sahib, which counts as the Guru now. I have a copy of it. I've studied it. I've been to Amritsar, which was their Sikh holy temple, gifted on land given by the great Emperor Akbar of India, who was a Muslim, but a tolerant, enlightened Muslim. And he loved the Sikhs. He thought they were doing something really important. And he himself wanted to found like a new religion of light that would encompass and include all wisdom from all traditions. India's got many, many religions. He said, why can't we have the best of them all? And he, every week or every month, he'd have a meeting with Jains and Hindus and yogis and Muslims and Sufis and so on. So, okay, but the 10th guru died a very long time ago. How do we access that same current now? The Radhaswami people say that we need a living guru to take you there. You can't just do it from books or from, like sticking pins in you or doing ascetic exercises or fasting for, 20 days or whatever. You need a living guru who can bring you to what they call the sound current. Radhaswami means the sound of the soul. And they believe that there's a sound that is the sound of the soul, which we can tune into. A bit like Pythagoras taught, the music of the spheres. We can actually hear this inner sound current. And this is taught in this circle through a sound mantra transmission, which comes to you via the Sat Guru, the divine guru of the day. Radhaswami was founded as this. Sant Mat means the path of the saints in Punjabi. So they would say, like I say actually, that all the traditions have got their saints in. I have a dictionary of saints, we might look at it in a minute. From all the traditions, they're in them all. But the thing is to awaken our own sainthood. How can we turn it on so that we're not asleep? And I've met people that practice this tradition. They believe in non-violence, non-harming others, vegetarianism, the purification of karma. You won't be able to hear the divine shabd, the divine current, unless you purified your listening. If you're full of anger, hatred, bad thoughts, you won't hear the purity of God's sound. I have a beautiful book by a Sant Mat person comparing the Gospels, because Christ often talks about hearing God, hearing the word of the Lord. It's also a Jewish and Christian idea. Hearing the Logos. I think it's St. John's Day, actually, at the moment. St. John the Divine, who says in the Bible, in the beginning was the Logos, which is the Word. But it's the word behind the word. It's the sound that makes the word.
Kind of vibration.
It is a vibration, yes. And it's thought there are probably about 2 million people at the moment that follow this new religion on the planet. And they use the Sikh scriptures, but they interpret them like more radically, more in depth, more philosophically. Okay, any questions, comments?
Yeah, when you talk about the sound of the soul sound, is it a sound, a frequency that is common to everyone, or that is an individual frequency that we each produce and can tap into?
That's a very good question. I think it's universal. I think the sound current is potentially within us all if we listen to it. But I suspect there are slight nuances and differences that the guru could tell, like, you're at this level, you're at this stage. I was initiated by a Sikh tradition, which is slightly different to the Sadmat one, called the Namdari Sikhs, which are box 115. And the then chief guru kind of whispered in my ear, a sound, which was the initiation. I can't. I don't know exactly the Radhaswami how they transmit that from master to pupil. So you'd have to ask one of them. But I do have books of theirs that you can pore over and find out. But it's a good one. I know more the Greek system of Pythagoras, that he used music and sound for philosophy and for healing. Because for Pythagoras, as for me, philosophy is a form of medicine of the soul. And Socrates also said that he was a midwife to the soul. And we get turbulated by life. We have pain, we have resentment, guilt, shame, all these things that cling to us. How can we purify ourselves from that? That's the purpose of this sound. It's like a waterfall of grace, that comes over you and cleanses you, all that stuff, which is what baptism is symbolically. This is the inner baptism of the sound current. And I think Pythagoras would give his pupils different sounds to practice. So if somebody was really angry all the time and kept interrupting and was rude, he'd give them a really peaceful sound to go and practice, and maybe to sing or hum or play on a lyre. But if somebody was really sleepy and had no energy in them and always half asleep, he'd give them a lively sound to practice, to wake them up. So I think it depends on the person where they're at. But I think the ultimate goal is to find the paradoxically, that absolute sound may be silence. This is the paradox. The greatest form of music is that absolute silence. Discuss. But good question. Yeah. Okay. Any. Okay. Well, let's move on and look at yours. Yes, eclectic goddess worship. Yes, I think this came up not that long ago. Originally, it was going to be called the hippie tradition.
Oh.
This is the California hippie tradition, which I encountered as a young adult and met people from California. But then I was thinking about it. No, there's something that's deeper than that. It's the whole eclectic goddess worship of hippies and neo-pagans who've gone for the esoteric core of all the spiritual wisdom teachings. And it flourished particularly in California in the 60s. And these people were reading Nietzsche, they were reading the Kabbalah, they were reading Hermann Hesse, reading about Theosophy, Blavatsky. They were taking LSD and exploring psychedelics, which were opening their minds to all kinds of altered states of consciousness that used to take centuries of deep meditation. They were getting it, in a pill. And I met this hippie guy from California a very intellectual one, who really impressed me. And I understood really what they were talking about. And I think, the Beatles were part of this in John Lennon and Paul McCartney, and they went to India and discovered transcendental meditation. Apparently, Bob Dylan Bob Dylan first got John Lennon stoned, sort of turned him on to alternative states of consciousness, and that was going around in the 60s. Jack Kerouac wrote about it all, and Dylan, and then a guy called Terence McKenna was very important. When I went to Haight-Ashbury, I was very late. I got there in 1992. I missed the 60s. I did a bit of the 70s. And then I was busy studying and, doing my degrees in the 80s. But I finally got to California in 92. And I went to Haight-Ashbury, which was the heartland of all this stuff. And I got talking to a guy over a coffee. And I said, well, what's happening? What's happened to the hippie scene now? And he said, have you ever heard of Terence McKenna? And I said, no. Should I? He said, go and read it, brother. He's where it's at. So I did. And I was on a Amtrak rail pass. I went around the whole States for a month. And I trained as a mediator in California, in San Francisco. That was where I was. Anyway, Terence McKenna was the intellectual who put all this together. And he said, if you haven't read his books, read them. He said several really important things. Firstly, we Homo sapiens got consciousness because some of our deep ancestors, about 14,000 years ago, started exploring magic mushrooms. He thinks it was probably North Africa. And that gave them such a download of consciousness experience that they invented language. They just bubbled with extraordinary experiences. I can only report from personal experience. I think I've shared this story before, but when I was inspired by all this stuff to find it out experientially, I had, of course, to try some LSD. I was at university in Bristol, and that's what we did in the 70s. And I was with my girlfriend, who I greatly revered, amazing woman, older than me, and she'd just got back from Peru, and she'd been doing this kind of stuff. She kind of knew what she was doing more. Anyway, we had this amazing experience. I'm not going to tell the whole story. But at a certain point of this trip, we were talking to each other, full-on deep discussion about the universe, the meaning of life and everything. And I could see our lips were not moving. I was talking to her, sharing my soul, and she was doing it back, but neither of our lips were moving. In other words, the whole thing was telepathic. And, that's just the truth. That's what happened. So I think when I had those kind of experiences, I think that's what Terence McKenna was talking about. That when our ancestors had those kind of experiences, it evolved them to another higher plane of consciousness. And we stopped being interested in which rocks we could make and who we could bash with them and, which animals we could hunt that day. And we realised that there's more to life than just hunting and bashing people with rocks, And that's where I think our intellectual capacities first started. This is what Terence McKenna says. And I think he was right. And then you can see this evolving as human beings then discover art. That's where art comes from. They start painting. And one of the first things they start doing is animals, obviously, which they depended on, lived with. But these animals were like archetypes, and often they paint the shaman as well. In Lascaux, in the caves here in the Dordogne, where we started doing art. I think these were the explorers of consciousness, and they were inventing rituals for the community that were about initiating through these different experiences for each generation as they come on stream. And the goddess seems to have been a universal archetype for all humanity. We find goddess art in all over the world, in the most early places. This was a reverence
When you mean goddess art is representing goddess?
Yes, yes, both visual but also sculptures.
Yeah.
So all over different parts of Europe, they find these feminine figurines, and not only in Europe, they found them in the Middle East, in the Levant, in Lebanon, in Israel, Palestine, and all the way to northern India. They find them in Central Asia, Iran, and northern India, and up into what used to be Soviet Central Asia, you know, the Tajikistan places. And I researched all this because I wanted to be an archaeologist when I was younger. And, you know, this is a fact, right? And so Maria Gimbutas, who was another of these great intellectual leap forward people, she wrote a book called The Language of the Goddess. And she says that in old Europe, which she focused on mostly, these goddesses were everywhere. They were on the pottery, on the pendants, on body art. These people revered and loved the divine feminine. And that's what came down to us in the Bronze Age as the Greek myths. So going back to Hephaestus and Hera, Hera was the goddess. You know, you didn't argue with her. So was Aphrodite. So was Artemis. So these different goddesses are like different archetypes. And of course, a lot of the eclectic goddess worshippers got very heavily into Jung, which I have to say I did. And I still am a great fan of Carl Jung because he was trying to explain all this scientifically. You know, so I've listed, I mean, some of the great heroes: Timothy Leary, Ram Dass, Ginsberg, the poet, Alan Watts, Terence McKenna I've spoken about, but and this flourished in the music, things like the Grateful Dead and that amazing flourishing of music. And then it turned into the dance scene of celebrating Woodstock and all the rest of it. But the goddess theme is important. So Monica Saju was a British pagan artist who did huge canvases of goddesses in the 70s and 80s. She wrote a great book about this. And Merlin Stone was a feminist religious scholar who wrote a book called The Paradise Papers, which is the most singly important book of biblical criticism written. She writes a study of the Bible from a goddess perspective, and she exposes it as a scam by a certain layer of male priests who wanted to defame the goddess traditions. They'd invented non-visual forms of communication, the alphabet, and they had a monopoly of that. So they were trying to say that all the other forms of sharing about spirituality are heretical. All the kind of things goddess worshippers like to do are outlawed. You know, they're from the devil. And that created this whole polarized good versus evil narrative in the Bible. And anyway, when I read that book in my early 20s, it was like a light bulb went off. And before you could blink, I was off in Ireland joining the Fellowship of Isis. So anyway, yes, it's an interesting tradition. Aldous Huxley is another figure that comes into this, who experimented with, you know, psilocybin and all kinds of things, and wrote about perennial philosophy. And I think there's a continuity, but I've just read this amazing book about the mysteries of the ancient Greeks. Because in ancient Greece, you didn't just study philosophy, you did the mysteries. And you had to go to Eleusis for that. It was you had to fast, it was a pilgrimage, you had to wear white, went in the sea and washed. And then you had this all-night session in the Holy of Holies. And it's thought that they gave you a drink, a kykeon, which was psychedelic, made from stuff similar to acid or LSD, chemically. And Plato and all these other great thinkers did the mysteries. That's why they could talk about what they talk about from an experiential perspective. So they count in this table, eclectic goddess worshippers. It's a new religious movement, hippie thing, but it's very ancient too. It's probably the most ancient on the planet. Discuss. Okay, that's enough of that then. That's very exciting. Any questions about those two?
Why are they neighbors in a periodic table?
Well, how the table was written, I was busy teaching full time, and I was working it with my philosophy club at one of the schools where I worked with, bright kids all on the way to university, and we designed it together. And it just took form organically, like you could say intuitively. Like, why are the Jewish ones down the side, you know? It just seemed appropriate because Jewish thought is very ancient and also very modern, you know, so it goes from because roughly chronologically it starts back here in the pagan times, and then it gradually goes down to the more recent stuff. And it was just divine coincidence that they ended up. But, you know, quite a few eclectic goddess worshippers have done that hippie trail to India, been initiated by the Radhaswami people, and, you know, it's a living tradition among them. Yeah.
Do you know if in some monastery, Catholic monastery, they could eat some magic mushroom or not to your knowledge? I should ask Frère Géric.
Well, according to this book, which is a study by an American author, which I've just finished reading, I can lend it to you if you're interested. That was the contents of the original sacraments that Christ used.
Oh.
He's discovered, it's an amazing book, The Ancient Mystery or something, I can't remember the title, that the original sacraments probably had a psychedelic thing in them. And so when the priest said, here, the body of God, and you took your sip, you went off on a trip, basically. And he says that the knowledge of that was passed down in the earliest churches. But after it became the official religion of the Roman Empire, they suppressed that knowledge. And they started persecuting the herbalists and the witches and the people that can make the potions. And what's interesting about this book is that they found traces in the cups, of communion cups, with psychedelics in southern Spain, parts of the Middle East. And so he's put together quite a good argument. And he is a Catholic himself. He went to the Vatican Library and he researched all this stuff in detail with the help of priests and theologians. I will definitely lend you the book. You can have a look at it. He'll answer your questions. Yeah, if anyone can. And I'm sure there are certain people, let's say on the edges of the church, that have had this knowledge all along, and would like to see it come back. You know, let's leave it at that, shall we? Okay. Well, look, for our last little thing, let's do the saints of the day, and then I'm going to finish with the poem. Is that all right? If we, so this is the calendar of saints and sages that I've produced, which is a kind of companion to the periodic table. So it's each day of the year has got 13 columns.
Is that what you were telling me about earlier?
Yes. Yeah. And today is the 23rd of June, I believe. So let's see who our saints and sages are today. Page 173. There's an awful lot of work gone into these volumes, and I did it because nobody else has done it. It's when I was teaching as a religious studies and philosophy teacher, I thought we needed something like this. So I tried to buy one, find one. Nobody's done it. You can't get any books about all the saints. You can buy